Good. Zila is recording, and welcome to Toronto.com's Town Hall on the Crosstown. Before we begin, we think that it's important and right to begin with a land acknowledgement. Although this is a virtual town hall, we are here in Toronto. We acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. So welcome to our town hall once again on the on crosstown communities. My name is David Nicol. I'm a reporter with Toronto.com and with the Toronto the Metroland community newspapers. That's the Scarborough Mirror, the North York Mirror, and the Etobicoke Guardian. And we are here to talk about the communities that are along the crosstown line. And that will be joined like villages on a river, I like to say, along this new line. So before we get going, we just some rules of engagement with if any of you have done Zoom meetings should be pretty familiar. We of course ask that during this meeting everybody remain respectful of one another. And that includes when others are speaking. So if you are not speaking, it would be great if you could mute your microphone. If you don't, and your dishwasher goes off or something, you may find yourself muted. Don't be offended. It's just to make sure that everybody can talk. There's going to be questions in this. This is a discussion as well as a panel discussion, and when we have questions, there are different ways that you can ask them. Using the chat function is a real easy way to get your questions across. I'll keep an eye on that and interject with those questions on your behalf. If you would like to speak, there's a way to do that. You can in the participants panel there's an option to raise your hand, and if you do that, it creates a great big list, and I can see how people are coming in order. So we can do that. We can do that, and also some of you might be calling in on the phone, and there probably is a way on TELUS to signal that, but I don't know it. So what I'm going to do instead is periodically I'm just going to stop things and say, hey, does anybody on the phone have a question? And that's your cue. Telephone person to jump in, but I think we can make this work with those simple rules. And just to warn you all, we are actually recording this. You'll see there's a little recording button up in the corner, and that's not kidding. We are hoping that we'll be able to run this on Toronto.com. We'll see how that goes. I should say this is a brand new thing for us at Toronto.com. We've done meetings before in my time here, but we haven't done this kind of thing. Thank you all for coming and participating in it. It really means a lot to us, and hopefully it's a way that we can move a little bit forward in these times. So why are we here? The journalists at Toronto.com, all of us participated in this summer in a pretty ambitious project. We wanted to take a look at the communities that are right now separate along the crosstown line, and we'll soon, when this thing finally gets open. It should have been open last month, but it's going to be a little bit longer now. When it's finally opened, there is. I'm sorry, I'm getting a call, and I have a feeling it might be from one of our panelists. So let me just get this. Hello, Dave Nicol speaking. Hey, Paul.
Okay, so let me pick up from where David left off there. I think that's one of our panelists who's maybe having trouble getting in here, but I'm very pleased to see that a lot of you managed to make it onto the TELUS platform. I know it's not as familiar as some of the others, but it's the one that we use here at Metroland. Just while we're here, David introduced himself. My name is Zilif Majid. I am the managing editor of the Toronto Newsroom, also the deputy director of content for the GTA, managing, overseeing the newsrooms in Toronto, Durham, and York regions. I'll just point out that you will see another one of our team members, Joanna Lavoie, is here. Why don't you just stick your hand up there? Joanna Lavoie is one of our reporters with Toronto.com as well. She does a lot of our breaking news and really specializes in social issues, has done extensive amount of work on the opioid crisis, and was also one of the reporters who worked on the Crosstown series. So just quickly, I'll let you know, the idea actually came from David. Every newsroom at Metroland was tasked with the challenge to come up with a project that really got us excited and that we wanted to put a massive effort towards. Not that we don't put a massive effort towards everything, but really to sort of do more than cover the news cycle. And it was David actually who said, why don't we do something about the Crosstown? It's scheduled to open soon. When we started talking about this, it was supposed to be open now. And talk about the impact that this massive transit project is going to have on the communities that lay along the line, because there's such a diversity of people and communities, and it's basically runs west east through the city. Couple of people still waiting for access, so we thought there would be interesting who's getting it, what impact, who's not getting it, etc. So anyway, we started working on this. It was just an idea in the spring, and we sort of really put nose to the grindstone in the summer and released we were going to release it in early September, and then an election was called. So we pushed it to the end of September. So if anyone hasn't had a chance to take a look, I've just put our hot topic URL in the chat. All of our stories, there are 10 in total. There's also a timeline. There's the setup piece. We did 8 community profiles. Some of you are from some of the communities that we profiled, talking about the impact. And we just wanted to open this up now to the public to have a conversation on this project and on your transit and community concerns related to transit. So, and don't have to be concerns, they could also be kudos and concerns. So, as David has already said, the panel is going to, David will chat a bit with the panel. He will introduce in a moment. One of our panelists is already here, Steve Monroe, and David will tell you a bit more about him in a minute. We're waiting for a second person to get connected. In fact, there'll be 3 panelists, and they're going to talk a bit, but we really want interaction from you. So, please use the tools here. Put your hand up, put a note in the chat, put your camera on, put your hand up, whatever works for you. We really do want this to be an interactive conversation. And David, are you free to chat now? Or are you still working with Paul? It looks like he's still working with Paul. Are there any questions or anything that anybody wants to ask? As David pointed out, we are recording. Part of this is we will write a follow-up article on this town hall, which comes sort of at the end of our Crosstown series. Andrew Palamarchuk, of course, another member of our team who also worked, he just put his hand up, who also worked on our team project, is the reporter for the North York Mirror, but has had a turn at many different things, including crime reporting, which is a very large specialty of his. So he will be writing a follow-up article. So partly this is, to capture what's said here, but also possibly to share this with other folks who couldn't make this chat tonight.
Yeah. I can actually save you right now.
Okay, good. I was asking if you can come in. So over to you.
I am back, and Paul Bedford is here too in a complicated jury rig connection. Apparently, as Paul has explained to me, getting connected to the TELUS app was a problem. He had some difficulty getting in with on the phone lines as well. So I've got my phone here. Paul is on the phone, talking through here, and it's. Thank you so much for going on this adventure with us, all of you. But here we are. Can you hear everything? Okay, Paul?
Yeah, no, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Is everybody able to hear Paul? Okay. Paul Bedford is here, and our third panelist, Kumsa Baker, is going to be a little bit later, hopefully before 7:30 to talk. But we are going to get going on things.
David, may I just suggest, is Paul not able to call into one of the numbers? Because I do see other people on the phone.
We did try that.
Okay. That might be a little clearer. Okay.
We'll do this for now. And I would, while this has been going on, Zilaf has been telling you many things about our project, and thank you for mentioning my one idea that everybody executed so beautifully. I had this idea.
David, I'm just going to point out that you sound really muffled. I'm not sure if it's the function of having the phone with that, but you sound really muffled.
Okay, can you hear me all right now?
We can hear you. It's just that there's a lot of feedback and it's muffled.
Okay, we'll probably have to do our best with this. I will speak very clearly, as clearly as I can. But the Eglinton Crosstown LRT has been a big part of Toronto history long before a shovel ever hit the ground. In the mid 80s, it had been identified that Eglinton was the east-west route to do something with. There have been talks about busways, talks about with the LRT. There was a brief attempt to make a subway in the mid 90s that the Bob Rae government began, and the Mike Harris government filled in. They actually filled in the tunnel on that. And finally, former Mayor David Miller and Premier Dalton McGuinty cobbled together something called Transit City, which did include this line. That was 12 years ago that work got started on this line, and it's been a long haul for these communities with a great deal of hope and a great deal of trepidation during this very long construction period. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the future. It's been a lot of dust, a lot of dirt, a lot of businesses that have had a very difficult time, and we wanted to talk a bit about the future. So that was the idea of this feature, and that's the idea of this evening too. We have invited three panelists here that I think can really help us dig in to where we're going along this route. And I want to introduce them now. And first off, Paul Bedford. Paul, I've known Paul for many years as I've been covering City Hall and beyond. He's the former chief planner for the City of Toronto. He's the current chair of Waterfront Toronto's Design Review Panel. He was the driving force behind the creation of the Amalgamated City of Toronto's official plan. He's been a huge advocate for transit-based planning and growth of this city. Too many things on his resume to really do justice to. Steve Monroe is a blogger and transit advocate and a very sharp transit critic of the way that the government has built transit in this province. I'm really glad that he was able to come here because I want to hear his perspective on this magnificent and line. And Kumsa Baker, I've only recently met Kumsa, he's right there, and he is the campaigns director of the Toronto Community Benefits Institute. And in many ways, the TCB is a great hope for a line that can sometimes have devastating changes as well as positive changes in the neighborhood to have an impact on a social level. And Kumsa, I hope that you'll be able to talk a little bit about the work that you've done so far, and the work we hope to do as all of this goes on. So to start, I kind of want to hear from each of you. I want to hear your thoughts on this place that we're at, jumping off towards a future of some sort for the communities. And Paul, let's start with you. Tell me.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Can everybody hear Paul? Okay.
Okay. Sorry for this. We got to do it by phone because the Telus app did not work. So I guess by way of introduction, I would have to say that at the starting point, Eglinton to me has always been kind of a no-brainer because it is the one main arterial road that runs through the entire amalgamated city of Toronto from east to west. Obviously, it's great. A lot of things going on there in terms of community activity and various transit nodes. So I guess the first thing I think that's important to emphasize about Eglinton is the citywide agenda. For me, I think Eglinton is a powerful addition to connecting to the existing and future transit network. As everybody knows, there's 25 stops along the route. There's, I believe, 5 intermodal connections with other transit and/or GO lines. So it's going to offer a lot more connection to the entire city and give people more mobility choices, especially also in terms of expanding the labor pool so that not only get to places of employment fairly quickly compared to taking 1, 2, or 3 buses. So those are some big picture citywide concerns and I guess perspectives that I think are important to keep in mind when looking at Eglinton. I guess the third thing about the citywide is that this is an inevitable part of growth and change. As many people may know, Toronto's population is almost 3 million now. It's going to go to about 4 million by 2050 and add another 500,000 jobs. So the reality is the place is growing, it's changing, and this is going to be an important piece of that transit network. So that's the citywide stuff. The other lens, I guess, to think about, we'll talk about that, is the local. And there's a lot there, but every community has what I call their wish list. This relates to the benefits, the things that maybe various communities do not have now that they could obtain through or leverage through a major infrastructure project like the Crosstown. They include such things as public realm, parks, community centers, street improvements, affordable housing. The list is endless. And again, as most people know, along Eglinton, there are numerous business improvement areas. And to make a long story short, we'll talk more about this later, several of those BIAs have formed an alliance on Eglinton from Mount Dennis in the west to along the corridor to basically put forward a collective voice to Metrolinx and say, look, we're here, we're being impacted, we need help, we need assistance, we need benefits, etc. So there's a lot of issues that need to be discussed there. And the last aspect I want to touch on by way of introduction is still with the local lens is numerous opportunities for places to live and for people to work, to complete communities. And this is an area where there's no one size that fits all. All stations are not in the same context, not in the same built form, and they need different approaches and different solutions. It's not a cookie cutter, high rise, marching towers all along. Would be the wrong approach in my view. One of the critical needs now in Toronto is about affordable housing. Ironically, on October 28th, planning is going to be discussing their recommendation which would require a certain percentage of units in new construction in specific locations to be dedicated for affordable housing, which I think is long overdue. And the last area I want to touch on briefly is that I think you need a diversity of building types, not, as I say, a whole cluster or a marching row of high-rise. You need different building typologies. You need mid-rise. You need some tall buildings at the right location. And they also have to meet the test of good architecture and quality urban design. There's a phrase that I like to use that says, tall buildings come with larger civic responsibilities and obligations. So if you want to go tall and you want to get bigger, you got more to give back. And I think those are some of the considerations that I know people have expressed concerns about along Eglinton. So I'm going to end it there for now and give it back to you, Dave.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Kumsa, you, one of the things that I think all of us, when we were reporting on the story, encountered was a great deal of concern that there might be people who are left behind. And when I spoke with you for this article, and I know that Mike Adler did too, you have a bit of a plan to make sure that doesn't necessarily happen. Maybe could you tell us about the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, awesome. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be part of this conversation today. And yeah, I think that's the lens that the organization that I'm with, the Toronto Community Benefits Network, has been taken in terms of as an organization, we're a community labor coalition of community groups and organizations and labor unions as well as social enterprises, and we've been involved with the Eglinton project since some of the early planning days of the Eglinton line. Recognizing that the project impacting many of the neighborhood improvement areas that Paul has touched on, and so having conversations with some of these community organizations and community groups who are being impacted by the project, really looking at how could this public investment in infrastructure really benefit the community. And so that's kind of how we really got involved in the concept around community benefits and community benefit agreements being included as part of these large scale infrastructure projects, because as the project is being built, there are a lot of wealth that's being created through the jobs that are being created on the project. And so as a coalition, we advocated to Metrolinx to negotiate and sign a community benefits framework that would apply to the Eglinton Crosstown LRT project, and that included commitments around local and equity hiring, especially when it comes to apprenticeships and getting good careers in the construction industry and sector, which has really been booming in the city of Toronto. And really working closely with local community organizations and workforce development agencies to, create the pathway for people who are being impacted by this Eglinton project to actually directly benefit and actually get a foot in the door into a really great career in construction. And some of the other things included professional, administrative, and technical career opportunities. So also looking at, those who are doing the design, the operations, the management, the HR, all of the sort of work that it takes to build this type of project, and also seeing where those opportunities can be created for equity seeking groups. And when I talk about equity seeking groups, I mean people like women, vulnerable youth, newcomers, Indigenous people, as well as racialized people in the city of Toronto. There was also some work around supporting local businesses and social enterprises. A lot of the local businesses, understanding that they were being impacted, by this project, and Metrolinx, as well as requiring the contractor Crosslinks Transit Solutions to commit to supporting local businesses through different procurement and purchasing opportunities. And so we've seen, some of the different positive benefits, that, this type of approach to developing infrastructure in our city, which has already realized, some really great outcomes that I outlined in the article that I had shared. There have been 439 specific hires through the community benefits program, so about 212 hires in apprenticeships, and another 227 in professional, administrative, and technical positions. Metrolinx has also reported about $8 million has been spent supporting local businesses along the Eglinton corridor through different purchases of goods and services. And then about 830,000 spent in terms of purchasing from social enterprises. And I think those are some really great positive benefits to highlight. But this was, Metrolinx really coming forward and wanting to work with community to come forward with this type of inclusive development. And this is also something that has been expanded to all of its projects, so including the Finch West LRT, as well as hopefully some of the new ones that are going to be rolling out relatively soon. And that's not to say that there's also been some learnings and negative impacts that the project has had, especially with some of the commercial businesses along the corridor, who've been heavily impacted, especially in Little Jamaica. And we've seen a lot of businesses that have had to close down, who've been severely impacted. And I think Metrolinx and the city, I think, have taken a lot to learn from that in terms of coming up with more concrete business support plans for businesses along corridors like Eglinton that are facing transit investment, which I think is really important. And so I think, as the Eglinton Crosstown LRT project ends and completes, and we see development continuing to sort of expand from this new transit investment along the corridor. I think community benefit agreements are a great tool to ensure that ongoing benefits come into the local community. And community benefit agreements are a relatively new concept here in Toronto. It's something that's been explored a lot more in the UK as well as in the US. And it can include things like, local and equity hiring for good jobs, training and apprenticeships, business procurement opportunities for local, diverse, and or social enterprises, as well as neighborhood improvements, like things like parks, community spaces, recreational facilities, childcare, affordable housing. And so, this is one tool that we've identified as an opportunity to really engage, community members and developers to make commitments, concrete commitments to how they will support, positive benefits going back into the community. And, speaking about affordable housing, I think I've been doing a lot of work, stemming from the Eglinton Crosstown LRT, and in terms of, recognizing the impact to, local businesses, and also raising the question around, what is the impact to, communities that are along the Eglinton corridor, especially, just north or south of the Eglinton corridor, a lot of neighborhood improvement areas. And so, the lack of true affordability in housing that's being built, I think, is a really big concern. I think, in terms of looking at the approach to housing, even with some of the new proposals that have come out, there hasn't been a lot of detail that have been shared around, what affordable housing will look like as part of these, large-scale projects. Our city is in a housing crisis, and this type of growth is needed. But how do we ensure that this growth is responsible and equitable? I think there's definitely a role that the development industry can play, as well as the city, in terms of planning policies that can really help to guide and ensure that the gentrification that happens, does not turn into any sort of widespread displacement of local residents and businesses, and we've seen some of that already, through the development of the Eglinton Crosstown project. And also acknowledging, the need for supporting, complete communities, that are not just, condos for wealthy people, but that can support, all people who live in Toronto. I think, even right now, when you look at the stats, a lot of households in Toronto pay above 30% of income on rent. and I think well over half spend about 50% or more on rent. And so this is a huge need, you know, especially in some of the neighborhoods along the Eglinton corridor. There's I would say like some of the, you know, some of this, you know, we're already seeing in terms of, you know, some of the homelessness that we're seeing, you know, across the city of Toronto. And, you know, this is only going to escalate some of the housing poverty and unaffordable housing that we're seeing, and potentially can also contribute to housing instability, and also have adverse impacts on physical and mental health for people who are living in Toronto, in the some of the surrounding neighborhoods. And then there's also the heightened concern for safety, and precarious housing, you know, particularly affects women and gender minority individuals, as well as single parent headed households, who are amongst the most vulnerable to experience inadequate housing in our city. And so that takes me to sort of the conversation around, you know, development shouldn't just be about the design. You know, I think a lot of the, you know, times like it's focused really on the physical and design. But I think a lot of the conversation also needs to focus around the environment and sustainability, as well as the social development, to ensure that we're creating a healthy, safe and complete community. And I think there are two examples of neighborhoods along the Eglinton corridor who are doing some really great work in terms of advocating for equitable, responsible, and sustainable development. And so I will reference some of those two examples. And the first one is in Mount Dennis, with the Mount Dennis Community Association's Eco Neighborhood Initiative, which is being supported by some local organizations in the neighborhood. And I do see a few representatives from that initiative here on the call today. And I think it's a really great opportunity to really you know, ensure that, you know, it's not just about, you know, development of condos, but also looking at, you know, what the environment, what the impacts to the environment, and how this could also be an opportunity to highlight how, you know, environmental sustainability can be built into a vision for new growth in our city. And I think that's, you know, been some really great work, you know, to get the city to recognize Mount Dennis as like a eco district, and one of the new sort of projects that group has undertaken is the development of an eco campus, or looking at the development of an eco campus, a post-secondary institution in Mount Dennis. This is an idea.
I'm going to just, sorry to cut you off there. We're going to get to all this stuff.
Okay.
I know we have a number of people who are really interested in asking questions, and I want to give Steve a few minutes to put his sense in. So apologies for that.
Can I quickly wrap up, like in a minute?
In a minute. Fantastic.
Awesome. So sorry, I didn't know how much time I had allotted for my section, so my apologies on that. I would just wrap up as saying, like, I think meaningful community engagement, I think, is really important, and I think there's some good success stories that we can look at in the city of Toronto in terms of how mixed income communities have been built, you know, with this, you know, lens around social development. And I think that community in Regent Park, in downtown Toronto, Regent Park, where there's been the development of a mixed income community, you know, and I think there's a lot of learning that can come from how we build, you know, how growth can also ensure equity and inclusion and affordability as part of that bigger vision. And so I will wrap up my comments at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Kumsa, and my apologies for my inaudibility. Paul has left us for a moment, so I can be better on this microphone. Let's see. Quickly, we do have some questions from the audience, but quickly,
yes, I was looking at the chat and I see there's stuff queued up there.
There's some stuff queued up, but tell me your thoughts on this epic rail laying.
Well, epic really is the term for it. I'm looking here at Transit City schedule, which is the original schedule for Transit City, and not just Eglinton, but all of the Transit City lines would have opened by now if we'd actually started them when they were planned to start. And it's something of a sad testimony to planning and transit funding and the politics of transit in Toronto that we're still waiting for the first one to open, never mind all 7 of them. An important thing, Paul touched on this a bit when he talked about Eglinton being a line that goes across the city. Eglinton, of course, was originally, the reason it's called Crosstown was the whole line was to go from the very east end of Toronto out at UTSC in Malvern, across Eglinton and out to the airport at truly Crosstown city line. We're getting the middle chunk of it, the hardest part to build, but we're getting that, and we're getting it many, many years late. But the important point was that it was not just one line. So much of Toronto's transit planning has been fights over where we're going to build one more line, because that's all we can afford to do. Transit City was proposed as a network of lines that would improve people's ability to move around all over the outer parts of the city of Toronto, with a line on Shepherd, a line on Jane, a line on Don Mills, the Scarborough-Malvern line. The now and forever debates about whether the Scarborough subway should be LRT or RT or what it should be. I mean, that ship sailed, so I won't get into it, but that was all part of the original design. And unfortunately, over the intervening years, we've fallen back to a situation where we're back to fighting over where my line is going to go or where your line is going to go. And that, I don't think, is the way to build a transit system. The other thing I would say, picking up on comments from others, is that I do not think that the intervention of Metrolinx and the province has been as useful as it might have been, because what we have obtained is another layer, and in many cases a layer that really doesn't understand building urban transit in Toronto, and has not been particularly friendly to the communities through which it's worked. Now, there are individual projects, individual parts of projects who have learned as they went along and become a little bit more civilized about dealing with communities. But there are still a lot of places where new transit lines are seen as a negative influence, as the province throwing its weight around, and not as the benefit that they might be. And I think that this is a trend that absolutely must be reversed for transit projects going forward from now, because I think we're in a situation where people are going to be not quite as pleased as they were 10 years ago when someone shows them a map saying, oh, look at all the subways I'm going to build for you. Because people are going to say, oh, is that so? So those are really my 2 comments. Metrolinx, as it's operating, doesn't work properly. And it's really important to retain the network view of the system, not just individual lines. Are you there, Dave?
Can you hear me okay now? I think I've got a plan. We're doing a really interesting kind of low-tech approach to all of this right now. I have Paul back on the line. Unfortunately, using the microphone on my laptop doesn't seem to be working, so I've got some wired headphones in now. And I had some questions, but we have some from the audience that I think that Paul actually might be a good person to answer. So I'm going to read out this from Sam that came a little while ago. Can you please share your opinion regarding the Don Mills and Eglinton vicinity? How do you envision this part of the corridor will transform by 2030, i.e. by the time the Ontario line is constructed? How will Ontario line impact Eglinton LRT? Would you say that this intersection will become a major hub comparable to Yonge and Eglinton or Don Mills and Shepherd? Bonus question. In your opinion, will the Ontario line be built, and if so, when? So that's a lot of stuff, but I'm going to pull the plug out now so you can participate.
It was Sam, right?
Sam.
So thanks for the questions. There's a lot there. I don't have the crystal ball, but from what I know, my sense is that the Don Mills station in Eglinton by 2030 will become a major hub. It's going to, if the Ontario line is built as planned, obviously it's a nodal point and a mobility hub connection. And quite frankly, I would think that where 2 transit lines meet beginning of my introduction, what's the wish list for that larger community there? What's missing now? How can you lever this enormous change that's going to come to get some of those benefits that are now missing from that larger community? So I would suspect they would include affordable housing, streetscape improvements, community facilities. I don't know, what the list looks like, but obviously the people that live there are the best people to determine that. So that's my best guess. I don't know if Steve has other thoughts on that, but it's assuming that the Ontario line is in fact built and does connect all the way up to Eglinton, which, by the way, I think makes total sense. It would be crazy to build the Ontario line and have it just stop on the Bloor Danforth line and not connect to Eglinton. Goes to Steve's comment earlier that you're building a network, not a single line. You want opportunities to move north, south, east, west, etc. So that's my sense of what I would see by 2030 there.
Okay, Steve, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Two things. I'm going to counter Paul's position. I am on. Yes. Do I have my mic on? Yes, I have mic on. Okay. I'm going to counter Paul's position about Don Mills and Eglinton looking like Yonge and Eglinton for a couple of very important reasons. And the first one is the size of the intersection. Yonge and Eglinton is part of the old city of Toronto, basically what were originally two four-lane streets meeting each other, although they've been widened a bit at the corner. But the buildings come out, to the street. The intersection, once the construction finishes there, is walkable. You don't have to stop halfway across. Don Mills and Eglinton is an intersection for cars. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that the development there, I really don't think, yes, the development on the northeast corner has eventually going to have a neighborhood behind it, but there isn't going to be the immediate neighborhood that generates walking traffic on the street right at Don Mills and Eglinton. It's not going to be lined with cappuccino shops and futon sales stores and high-end groceries or low-end groceries. It's going to be basically a road intersection with four corners that almost turn their back on it. And, they have neighborhoods behind the corner, but not neighborhoods that are part of the corner. And I think that's a very serious problem we have throughout the suburbs generally, is how do you intensify development at an intersection that basically is an intersection for cars, not for people.
Yeah, hi. Believe it or not, I finally got on this thing.
Fantastic. We can hear each other.
Nice to see you, Steve. So, I appreciate Steve's comments. I didn't mean to say this will be a duplicate of Yonge Eglinton, but I do think it will become, a transit hub, a mobility node, whatever you want to call it, if the Ontario line intersects with Eglinton. I totally agree with Steve, though. And anybody who knows that intersection knows it's car dominated. It's big streets with four corners. So there's a huge agenda to transform that area into more of a community that has the feeling and the street life and all the activities that Steve just talked about. But I have to say that I think it's not going to be two-story buildings, that's for darn sure. It's going to be a major transit hub.
Yeah, Kumsa, do you have any thoughts on how Don Mills and Eglinton are going to come together?
Not specifically on this site, just because I haven't really been following much on what's happening there, so I wouldn't be able to speak much to it, unfortunately. Okay.
I just wanted to actually shout out a couple of people who are in the audience. Stephen Holliday, who offered some really strong material to our reporter Tamara Shepard, writing about the part of the Eglinton Crosstown that isn't quite yet, or is rather less than the rest of it that's also not quite yet. Stephen, do you have you will have no thoughts, I imagine, on Don Mulls and Eglinton, but you sure will on on Eglinton through Etobicoke. What? Oh, Stephen, can you be heard? Oh, it looks as though.
How's the sound now?
Oh, that's great. Okay, we're on.
There you
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, David, you know, a politician, I'll fill up the rest of the hour, but
Yeah,
I just, look, thanks for having me on the panel tonight. I like to listen to what people have to say. I see some names from the area that I live in. I recognize faces on here. Hi, Paul Bedford and others. This is just like, this is a huge thing for the community. I've lived here almost 50 years, not quite. And in my life, I don't remember anything of this scale of change. And I was just up off of Finch Avenue in Etobicoke a couple of times in the last week, and you know, you see the dig going on. But I don't have any reason to think that over generations, things will change like they have along Bloor Street, and it will be the spine. The one thing I would say about Etobicoke and this piece over here is, you know, we're not as dense as we are in the rest of the city. But this is a really important connector to people to jobs. The Airport Corporate Center is not a dot on the map. If you know Etobicoke and you know that part of the city, it's an entire district. You couldn't walk across it in like 2 hours. Like, it's huge, right? And there's a lot of people that work there. And then there's the airport. A lot of people that work at the airport live in Ward 2, the area that I represent, but they live in Etobicoke in the west end of the city. And in fact, you can look at the aerial view of the city, and you can make arguments that, you know, the 427, 401, 400 interchange, the airport, the rail lines actually skewed the development over time. And you know, for every reason, I believe a transit line like this will reshape growth over generations. So that's why it's so important and profound. I just enjoy watching these plans come alive, because you see them happening right now. And it's, you know, it's a big short-term concern in the community about all the construction and all the disruption, but also, you know, what does this mean for our community that we live in? What does it mean for our children? I think most answers point to it means something good, but it's going to be change. So I won't take up any more of your meeting. You've got panelists and others to speak, but just thanks for saying hello and letting me participate, and good for you for putting on this production.
So before you go, Councillor, we have a question from Sam that is directed at you and also
Sure.
other panelists, but I know you had limited time, so you first. Can you share about the EG West LRT extension will impact EG LRT? Will the line go to the airport by 2030 or just close by? He writes, the GTAA is having cold shoulders for the final extension due to COVID loss. Is this true?
Well, I mean, I think that's a very, very short-term view. The extension to the airport, so the LRT comes right to the City of Toronto border, the 416 border, and then it stops. And then it's a dotted line. And it's a question many politicians have been asking. It's bigger than the chamber that I work in, the City of Toronto chamber, but I think there's an earnest continuation. Why on earth would you build this piece of infrastructure and not connect it to a node like the airport? As I said, you know, travelers might have that quick UP Express. They can pay the lots of money to get there really fast. But everyone else that's kind of regular people like me, and somebody that needs to visit there as a worker, and you forgive me, I forget the stats, but we're talking tens of thousands of workers, and if not hundreds of thousands within the vicinity of the airport, you know, need good transit to get to that location to activate those potentials. So I see this as a conclusion. I just can't tell you when. I wish it was sooner. I wish it was just keep the tunnel boring machine go, but I think you're onto something. And I think the business case to do the work, especially the undergrounding, is weakened if you don't actually finish the line to the airport. So somebody's got to have plans for it. I suspect it comes down to money and, you know, a future phase. That's my opinion on it anyways.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. Steve Monroe, you have some thoughts.
Yes, I think obviously just stopping at Renforth Gateway, where the current terminal is on the map, is short-sighted, to put it mildly, but going to the airport isn't the whole thing either. It was interesting during the debates about the route the Eglinton West line might take. there were two different routes into the airport considered. One was the south route along Eglinton and up from the bottom. The other was to dodge up and go in across Kingston Road. And it's really important to remember that, you know, when you talk about people going to work at the airport, it's not just the airport building. Those tens of thousands of people who work out there work in a huge area scattered around the airport, roughly the size of downtown Toronto. And so it would be like building the Yonge subway and only having a station at King and Yonge if you just kind of stop at the airport and dump everybody off, because people have to get around the airport as well. That's an issue not just for the TTC, it's an issue for all of the regional transit agencies around the airport, because all the people who work there don't come from Eglinton Avenue, they don't come from downtown Toronto, they're coming from Mississauga, they're coming from York Region. And a big challenge for serving the airport is getting good bus service into there from many directions and serving many different destinations, not just the airport terminal itself.
Okay. Thank you. I want to go back a little bit up the chat line. We have a question from Martin Green, which I think is a really fundamental one. Martin asks everyone, how do we transform the suburban arterial roads to help build 15-minute communities? And that's always been a question along this line, along many communities that are maybe 15 minutes driving on a good day. Turning these communities into walkable communities. And I'll throw that to anybody who wants to jump in.
Well, maybe I can add a few initial comments there to start it off. I would say, to be very frank, with time and strong political will and community support. The fact is, some of these arterials, you know, they're 6 lanes wide and they're like highways, and they're not very intimate for transformation, for pedestrian, you know, intensification, etc. So radical surgery is part and parcel of the solution, I think. But, you know, you have to pick your spots. You know, where is the potential to, in fact, create and transform some of these suburban arterials into more like places and neighborhood main streets. And I think the community input in that is absolutely essential. But, you know, it could involve such things as narrowing the right of way, getting rid of traffic lanes, obviously intensification. You're not going to transform these major arterial streets by building 2-story buildings. It simply is not going to do anything. So it's a multiple agenda that I think is needed. And I would say, you know, pick your spots and really perhaps develop some pilots where you think the potential is greatest. And there's nothing like proof of the pudding, you know, get something done instead of just talking about it forever. So I guess one example I seem to recall from my days at City Hall was Kingston Road. If you follow Kingston Road through the beach community and all out into Scarborough, et cetera, as everybody knows it, it's wider and less dense and more car oriented as you move out towards the 401 for obvious reasons. And, you know, when we did the official plan in the early 2000s, I remember meeting with community groups in the Kingston Road area and said, well, tell me, what would you love to see this street evolve into over time? What's your favorite street? And they kept saying places like Bloor West Village or the beach, you know, or Queen Street, etc. I said, well, how do you think that's going to happen? And basically, after a lot of discussion, they realized it's going to happen through major change, through radical surgery, through intensification. And I think those kinds of considerations are what have to be brought to bear.
I think there's, this is something where Kumsa could come in because he's really familiar with the area. One of the problems that came up when we were first talking about Transit City and the potential for redevelopment was that a major part of many suburban arterials are the little strip malls, which are very much community centers. They're also incubators for small businesses, for new immigrants. restaurants, services, all sorts of things. And they unfortunately sit on land that's big enough that someone can come along and say, I'm going to build a tall building here. And that tall building sure isn't going to have affordable little stores in the base that people in the community can walk to or drive to. And that's a real challenge, because when you talk about a 15-minute city, there's got to be something within 15 minutes to walk to. There's no point in having all these beautiful streets, but nothing there. And I think the bigger challenge is how suburban neighborhoods, whether in fact the Bloor West Village model really can be mapped onto the suburban arterials the way we've built them. And whether the community centers are going to be not on the arterials, but rather inside, like community squares, if you will, rather than thinking of the arterial as being the focus for that sort of thing. And I think that's a thing that's been missed.
Okay, thank you. Martin Green, you have your hand up. Did you want to have a follow-up question?
Well, I'd like to address that specifically. Now, Steve Monroe made a good point that we've got these strip malls. In fact, I live in Etobicoke, near Eglinton. We've got a local plaza, which is now going to be redeveloped. And the developer, in proposing primarily condos, has already essentially evicted 25 small businesses. So the small businesses are being kicked out, and our community becomes less walkable. In fact, we have to drive a long distance to get to anything. Now, I agree that we could develop, in the areas that are, not on the arterial roads, but even those small plazas, the existing ones, are being bought up and turned into townhouses or condos. And so all of this is disappearing, and it's a planning problem, and it's a zoning problem. So our mixed-use zoning actually gets interpreted as we can build condos. And we get token stores, but we lose that walkability. And so I'd be happy to see more development off the arterials, but I think we also need to have development along the arterials in order to get things going. The arterials, basically the communities were built turning their backs on the arterials. We have backyards on the arterials, and they're only for transportation. And that's killing the communities. It's killing the prospect of having 15-minute communities.
Yeah. You had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great, very informative discussion, and I've heard some key points here. I just want to highlight a few concerns regarding how the best way to address them. We are already in the process of addressing them, but your insights and valuable feedback will be much appreciated here. So I'm from Thorncliffe Park Drive. I'm a resident of Thorncliffe Park Drive for the last 14 years. And as most of you are aware, this is the most densely populated neighborhood in North America, with an approximate population of 30,000 people living in this very square mile radius. So Metrolinx actually proposed the extension of the LRT line going from Overley to Overley Boulevard from Thorncliffe, which was initially brought to our attention 3 years ago. And being always open for transit development, the community was very receptive to the idea. Then out of the blue last year, I think somewhere in September or October, they were Metrolinx just unilaterally, without any community consultation or any community discussion or feedback, planned to build a MSF Metrolinx storage facility right in Thorncliffe. Some of you might be aware of the geography of Thorncliffe Park neighborhood, there is a strip mall with small businesses, the Iqbal Foods, and other small businesses there. So they get taken over that land, as well as the land of the Islamic Society of Toronto, as well as the adjacent piece of green vacant land, and amalgamated them to build a MSF facility without any community consultation. So this matter was brought to the attention of the community back, I think, in this year, April or May, end of April and May, and when the community strongly objected to it, and that's when we approached the local member of provincial parliament, Kathleen Wynne, the local member of parliament, Rob Oliphant, the city councillor, J. Robinson, who moved unanimously, who moved a motion in the city council against this MSF, which was passed unanimously by the Toronto City Council. And then when the Kathleen Wynne initiated a roundtable with Metrolinx, But all those meetings with Metrolinx came to no solution or whatsoever. Like with the very strong tactics, I would say, about the Metrolinx team, the Phil Westner, the CEO, and his team, and when the community presented the hard fact, not a single point was addressed into it, but it was just like kind of a my way or our way or a highway kind of a situation. The community even went engage external consultants and even presented an alternate piece or alternate site, which would keep the community's vibrancy and the small businesses intact. But that was also refused on without concrete explanation. So we reached out to the, as I told you, all the three elected levels of government. They all sent a joint letter of strong objection to the Premier Duckford, to the transportation and infrastructure ministers, but again, no response whatsoever. And then I think this article was also covered by CBC last week.
Excuse me. Do you have a question, Ziad, for anybody?
So no, so my question to this was like, in this kind of a scenario, like, what will be the option for the community to go ahead and fight for their cause?
Steve, over to you.
Okay. Metrolinx are not known to be very open to suggestions about changes. And it was interesting, the whole issue in Thorncliffe Park, Metrolinx tried to give the impression that, oh, we're so sorry. We thought we told everybody we were doing this and, well, we won't ever do it again. Well, that was kind of interesting because
absolutely, yeah.
Because then last week, pardon me, there was a consultation session for the downtown segment. And what was one of the complaints from business people along Queen Street? Why haven't you consulted with us about the work that you're doing? So, this is not a one-of situation. And of course, this has happened before. There were big fights. I noticed that Rick Cicerelli from Weston is on the attendee list. There were huge fights in Weston about a GO grade separation there. There were fights about the maintenance facility at Mount Dennis. And Metrolinx, if they can pick the most contentious, difficult, community alienating way to do something, that's what they do. And transit in Toronto has been very badly harmed by this approach. And frankly, I hope whoever replaces Doug Ford as premier next summer goes in and cleans out Metrolinx and find some people who actually understand what community relations are all about, because we are not going to get things built properly in Toronto with an agency that just throws its weight around and literally in one meeting said, we can do anything we want to. And that's how Metrolinx operates. So I'm sympathetic to communities that are fighting Metrolinx, and I've been involved in helping some of them behind the scenes, but it is so frustrating dealing with an agency that could be doing so much better work if it weren't for their own intransigence about our way is the way.
Steve, is there any way I can reach out to you offline?
Why don't you take that offline, or maybe in the chat you can connect, just so we can move along a little bit in our discussion. One of the questions that came up earlier, I believe Sam asked this, and I received one by email as well. Signal timing and priority signalization. There's some question as to whether the surface route is going to have signal priority for the LRT cars as they come along. What is the panel's sense as to the impact that this discrepancy of a very fast run through the tunnel and a run that's nearly in traffic on the surface will have on the efficacy of this line?
I think that's a good question for Steve to kick it off, and maybe I'll have some additional thoughts, because he's the expert on that. I mean, I can make some very general comments, but I guess we have experience with St. Clair streetcar. It's not quite the same. And, Highway 7, the busway. So why don't you kick it off, Steve, and I'll see what I can add to it.
Okay. Speak to me. Oh, I am already. Okay. Eglinton is a very different street from Sinclair or Spadina or Queens Quay, where we already have a right-of-way and traffic signals that are quote-unquote transit priority signals. Of the three of them, Sinclair probably works the best, and it's not ideal. One of the big issues is that even on Sinclair, the places where there is transit priority tend to be minor intersections. Well, Eglinton has an awful lot of major intersections and not so much in between. And actually, some of the minor intersections got closed off by the right-of-way. So there's always a kind of a tug of war between giving priority to transit and not screwing up all the other traffic on the street at the same time. And it's funny, just today there was a Twitter chat going on between me and some others about how we would, about whether in fact the transit priority such as it will be on Eglinton will help or harm the transit operations. And I mean, one of the big issues on arterials generally is that the cycle time for those big intersections is much longer. And if you miss the cycle, you sit there waiting a long time. Doesn't matter if you're going to get, an advanced green, you still have to wait for the other direction to get its very long green time. And some of that green time is actually for pedestrians, because if someone sets off from one side of the street to cross, the light had better not turn red while they're only halfway there. So technically there are challenges, but I think what tends to happen in the city is that when someone says, let's have transit priority, it's transit priority, whatever's left over from keeping the cars happy. And that's a fundamental change that's much harder to do on a suburban arterial where the transit mode share is very much lower than on a street like King or Queen Street, where a very high proportion of the road users are not motorists.
So I think that, Paul, do you have thoughts on this?
Well, no, I don't disagree. I think that, the reality is generally if you have LRT cars full of people, it makes a lot of sense to give transit priority where possible at the key intersections. But I couldn't help but think of riding it's not quite the same, but riding the Spadina streetcar from Spadina Station down to the waterfront and around back up to Union. When you come to every intersection on Spadina, cars have the priority. The streetcar sits there and waits to some people with one person per car gets to turn left in front of the streetcar before it can even go through the intersection and load or unload. And sometimes that trip from Spadina down to the waterfront is excruciatingly long. And so I think, like everything, there has to be some considerations in terms of volumes and conditions, and you don't want to, give any one mode total priority and screw up the rest of the street. So I think that question is going to have to be answered over time as the line becomes operational. There'll be teething and sorting out, and what works, what doesn't, and modifications made as it evolves.
Thank you. Rick Ciccarelli, you had your hand up a little while ago, and I did not notice, but now I know. Do you have a question, Rick?
I'm not sure if I can be heard because my chat function wasn't working. Am I?
Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I guess one of the things that I wanted to respond to the earlier concerns about Metrolinx and their bullying style is it is certainly problematic, but what we've been relatively successful at is being propositional. So if you understand that transit needs to be built, but want to take into account certain things, put those forward. And it goes back to what Kamsa was talking about in terms of the community benefits negotiations, but there's got to be things that the community is saying that it wants if Metrolinx wants approval for whatever it's trying to achieve. So just a thought in terms of the maintenance and storage yard debacle that's going on the East End. And thank you. As I guess one last point would be community benefits has worked with public infrastructure dollars. We're now set up for major private development. And my question, I guess, would be, can we get the private development community to respect the need to get into negotiation with communities around the things, as opposed to just assume it's going to be, oh, we'll get some bonusing density for whatever it is they're going to get charged for extra parkland.
So, that sounds like one for you.
Well, I'm happy to kick it off if you want.
Sure.
I appreciate Rick's observations, and I think my answer is hell yes. And you better advocate. Communities better advocate and use all of the private development that is going to be coming along this transit line over the next 10 years, and spell out in concrete terms exactly what the needs are for those respective communities. Obviously, affordable housing is top of the agenda for obvious reasons. And that's why I mentioned the inclusionary zoning proposal that's coming forward to the city later in October. I think the fact is, if developers are getting tremendous densities in some of these locations, they got to give back. And it goes to the quote I referred to earlier, that tall buildings come with larger civic responsibilities and obligations. And, affordable housing, streetscape improvements, community improvements, BIA enhancement through a whole variety of agendas. Those things, I think, are realistic to achieve. But you've got to have the planning policy in place that allows you to push that button and that agenda. You have to have a strong community that is united behind whatever you're seeking. And you have to have a supportive city council and obviously city planning staff that are going to advocate for these things. But if you don't do it with all this development coming, when are you ever going to do it? So I would say don't miss that opportunity to lever benefits from the private development community.
Yeah, I think those are some really great points, and I would definitely add, I think through a lot of these new public and private type of infrastructure projects that we've seen in the city, and I think Regent Park is one. We now have Housing Now with all the new Housing Now projects, where I think those can be looked at as the opportunities to build communities, right? In terms of looking at what have been some of the successes and learnings from those type of projects that we can bring to other neighborhoods, right? Because and what is that model? What does it look like? And so I would say, definitely, being organized and being proactive. Development is something that moves very fast sometimes, and so as a community, trying to be proactive in terms of engaging, with the local government and decision makers and staff, engaging with the developers as early as possible in the process, I think is an excellent approach. We're now seeing more and more of these pre-application consultations that typically happen before the application goes in. And I think those are really great opportunities as a community group to be part of those processes, especially very early on, to voice your concerns and some of the priorities that you have, and so that it could be built into the project's vision rather than having to review something and to make changes to something that's already been developed or a vision that's already been developed by the developer. And the last thing I would add, I think also is, there are some developers in the city that actually want to do more equitable approaches and inclusive approaches to development. Whether some of them have corporate policies, especially recently with all the things around Black Lives Matter and the focus around equity, and some of these companies have started to develop policies and and corporate goals and objectives that may align with how they're doing development in our communities, and to question some of those policies and nice things that they say out there, but are actually not translating at the local level. And I think those are some recommendations or ideas that I would have to share on that piece.
Thank you. So I just would remind everybody we have just a bit under 15 minutes left, which is time for a couple of questions and discussions. So first off, earlier I had promised that I would throw to the phones. If I know that we have one person here who's called in. If there are any questions that you have, now's the time. Okay, I will assume that not quite yet. Judith Hayes.
That person is muted. The phone is muted.
Oh, wait a second. Let me just see if I can unmute that. I don't think that, okay, there. You're unmuted now. Do you have any questions? Okay, if you do, you can jump in towards the end. We do have a question that Judith Hayes wrote in the chat, and it's a question and observation. I'll just read it out now. Interesting that Metrolinx wants MSFs in Mount Dennis and Thorncliffe Park, both low-income areas. What would happen if they wanted to put one in Young Eglinton with no consultation? And that's that speaks to a lot of stuff. Anybody who wants to.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, consultation is not consent. And I think sometimes, you know, there's this idea of just doing consultation will achieve, you know, what they're hoping to achieve. And I think, like, you know, communities have the right to demand more in terms of accountability and transparency, especially to how decisions are being made. And I think in both instances, I don't think the community has actually been afforded that accountability and transparency in how decisions are being made, and especially with how the news even came out, right? Like for the community to learn about this new MSF in a blog post, you know, and for that to be picked up and then disseminated in the community, and this, you know, huge uproar, like, you know, that's not the way consultation should be happening, especially, you know, in low-income communities where there is already a barrier to participating in consultation. We know a lot of the challenges already, you know, these community faces, a lot of these low-income communities face, even in accessing, you know, consultations, you know, during a pandemic. You know, a lot of consultations have moved online, making it even more inaccessible. There's a lot of language barriers as well in terms of, you know, making sure that people can actually understand some of the information that's being shared. And so I think in general, I think, you know, the approach that has been taken, I think, you know, has led to this rather. And I think Metrolinx definitely has to do a better job to not just consult, but actually take in what people are saying, right, in terms of the impact that would have to those businesses. And I think Judith puts a great point in terms of, you know, what would happen if this was at Yonge and Eglinton with no consultation, because I'm sure it would be a whole different type of process that would have been established there.
Rick, I'm going to guess that you have something to say about this. You got your hand up.
Thanks, Dave. Just a reminder that the two are different. The Kodak lands was former employment land that was being bought up for a big box mall. And we fought, and Judith, you were part of this, we fought to maintain those as employment lands. And then we fought to extend the Eglinton LRT from where it was going to terminate to the east of the Black Creek, so that it made its way past the MSF and a station in Mount Dennis. So, I mean, the Kodak lands had a history of being employment lands, and what we did by fighting for the maintenance and storage facility was maintain that kind of industrial use. Featured it in terms of the kind of technology, but certainly there's a number of jobs that has produced for the community and for the wider city of Toronto. So I don't know what's happening on the MSF on the east side, how they've negotiated it. Sounds like it's been a total shell game. But one of the things to think about is how do you get access of that economy for your community, of that project economy for your community, the jobs, the businesses, the other kinds of spin-off innovations that can happen.
Okay, we are getting very close to the end, and we have not, it has occurred to me, talked about Scarborough nearly enough. So thank you to Sam for raising this. And I just, before we go into this, I want to shout out Mike Adler, one of our extraordinary reporters who writes about Scarborough like nobody else in the city, and may have something to say about this too. If he does not, that's okay. But here is Sam's question. Will East LRT extension be added to the plan ever? And if so, when do you think? How will this impact the Eglinton LRT and the corridor?
Okay, well, I don't hear Paul chiming in, so I'll start talking.
Well, I had something I could say, but I want you to lead off, because I was going to say, who the hell knows? Given the debate that's gone on with that line, into Scarborough. But why don't you take over, Steve?
Okay. I think it will be built eventually, but there's a big problem. Basically because we've spent, and it's funny money, but we've spent, I think, every dollar that any government is going to be able to scrape together for transit infrastructure for easily the next decade, because everybody's been so happy to throw money at transit and say, look at what we're doing, and we're getting the Scarborough subway, we're getting the Eglinton West LRT underground, we're getting the Yonge extension up to Richmond Hill. There's a whole raft, and of course there's the Ontario line. Mustn't forget the Ontario line. Well, that's a lot of money on the table over the next 10 years. And on top of that, there's a backlog of major capital maintenance the TTC has to do just on the system we already have, never mind building anything new. Now, there is pressure for two projects, both of which John Tory has mentioned. One is the Eglinton East LRT, the other is the Waterfront East LRT. Both of them have languished for many years. They're not high on anyone's priority list, and yet they both have an important role to play, each in their own way where they would be built. There's a big problem with getting transit out into Scarborough to the east. The Scarborough subway will go north, and if you live at Shepherd and McGowan, you're in great shape if you want to go to King and Bay, because you're going to have a subway that'll take you right downtown. The fact you already have a GO train, well, they charge too much for it, and that's a whole separate debate. But my worry is that, we're going to come out of the COVID era, and everyone's going to suddenly get an attack of austerity because we've basically spent every penny we have for the next decade getting through the pandemic and making promises on major capital works. And of course, I've only talked about transit capital works. There's a whole lot of other portfolios like healthcare, just a little one there, that healthcare and long-term care, where there are a lot of demands for capital. So I worry that both Eglinton and Waterfront will get to a nice state where there's a nice plan. We might even have 30% design that someone's paid for, and they'll sit on the shelf and never be built.
Yeah, I have to say I share that worry, and the history and the tortured debates over the Scarborough subway and LRT extension speak for themselves. I don't want to revisit history, but in my personal view, I think things could have unfolded a hell of a lot better, and we could have had more bang for the buck. Just take the Scarborough subway debate as one example. So I honestly don't know, but I think Steve's giving you the straight goods. Unless there's something that we don't know of, it's probably a ways away.
One other thing I would say, I noticed a comment come up there about 2035, 2040, 2045. Well, one of the things that kind of annoys me is that people say, oh, the feds aren't holding up their end. They should be funding all these projects. Well, there's a basic problem that the feds have is that any program that they launch for Toronto, they also have to launch for Montreal and Quebec and Vancouver and Edmonton and Calgary and Winnipeg, and the list goes on. And the feds seem to be a lot happier if they're going to do anything to say, okay, we'll give you X million dollars a year forever. You do with it as you will. And the feedback, I mean, I asked people in Ottawa repeatedly about the fact that they were funding the expensive projects that Doug Ford was building. And their attitude was, the city endorsed these projects. We are simply doing what the city wanted to do. And until you can get a city council and a mayor that isn't busy trying to buy votes in one particular ward, every 4 years, you're not going to get a network view of things. You're not going to get the less popular lines built.
Thank you, Steve. We
Sorry
are.
to sound like such a wet blanket at the end of the.
No, it's okay. Sad endings are good art. And it's not
Sometimes
sad.
the truth really hurts.
It does, yeah. So listen, thank you everybody for sitting down in your studies today and joining us on TELUS Business Connect with Toronto.com about this. It is such a vital issue. I feel that we could do dozens of these things focused. I think in the comments somebody suggested that might not be an idea. Maybe we will to delve into some of the communities that we haven't been able to talk about, but that you can read about in our series Crosstown. It is. It's an important time that we're in, and even if it might not work, we are, I think, embarking on an important growth in our city. Thank you, everybody, for coming and participating.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Awesome. Thank you for hosting, David and team.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a very good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.